Welcome to Twinview Talks, a podcast focused on the digital revolution of the AECO industry. I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Phanos Hadjikyriakou, the co-founder and CEO of 2050 Materials. Their mission is to empower everyone in the construction industry to make informed, data-driven decisions in line with the climate emergency. And they're doing this by building the easiest way to find, compare and specify building materials according to their sustainability. Welcome, Phanos. How are you?
Thank you, Neil. I'm doing well.
Amazing. So for everyone's benefit, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of why you and the guys at 2050 Materials are so passionate about this mission?
Definitely. So I come from an engineering background. I sort of focused on data and modeling my entire career. I worked quite a bit of time in the ESG space, so more in relation to investors and helping those investors assess climate change risks and opportunities on their portfolios. And I came a little bit more into the construction and the AEC industry when I heard a lot of real estate investors talking about materials that go into their buildings of their portfolio. So that kind of sparked my interest to understand whether, we have the right kind of infrastructure, data, software to address that need. And as you would imagine, there isn't really much there. So that's why we have this kind of strong mission. On the reason we're so passionate about this, it's really, a huge opportunity, I would say, for the construction industry to create and build more sustainable buildings, but it's also a huge necessity from a pure climate perspective and the things we need to do as society to stay within a livable planet.
Amazing. And within the AEC industry, kind of why is embodied carbon such an issue?
So it's a really good question. Generally, the AEC industry is responsible for something around 40% of all global emissions, which is absolutely massive. So it's almost half of global emissions. And traditionally, we've been looking at building energy, so what we call operational emissions in the built environment. But what's happening now is we have both the energy system, which is becoming more renewable and therefore less carbon intensive, which means that the operational emissions are just reducing. And that means that the other component of emissions of the built environment, so the embodied carbon, everything that relates to materials, is suddenly becoming a lot more important of a topic to tackle if we want to reduce emissions overall. So that's one big reason why embodied carbon is such a huge topic right now. The other big reason, which not a lot of people think about or talk about very often, is that from a pure amounts perspective, there is a timing issue with regards to embodied carbon emissions versus operational. So when we build a new building, the operational emissions are broken down across the lifetime of the building. So they're happening on a year-by-year basis as we consume energy. But embodied carbon emissions, they happen actually even before the building is up. So all of the materials that are manufactured, they create emissions in order to be manufactured, which means that every decision we make on embodied carbon has a very profound impact today on the amount of emissions that are in the atmosphere.
Understood. And then what are the potential impacts if we don't address this problem?
So in the short term, I would say the impacts are, as a company, let's say you're an AEC company, you essentially are staying behind. So you are either creating a problem for yourself by being non-compliant with future regulations that are very much coming into play. And then even if regulations are taken out of the picture, I would say that we are seeing competitiveness in the market and, let's say, commercial viability have a very strong correlation to the companies that are prioritizing embodied carbon emissions. So to put it more simply, you're risking losing clients basically if you don't try to address this sort of topic. And then on the more long term, no one really knows exactly to what extent climate change can create problems for the world, but things are looking pretty grim the last few years. So I would say it's truly an existential issue, and we have both a huge responsibility as the industry creates so much emissions, but also a huge opportunity to reduce those emissions. So really big impacts for everyone, not just for the industry, if we don't address it.
I think you're right. We're starting to see it's become more visible to the many now, the impact we're having on climate and the disastrous effects it can have further down the line. What do you feel has been the main blockers historically, that stopped people within the AEC industry from really addressing this and trying to get on board with making a change?
So there's three things I see as kind of the main blocking points up to now. The first thing is that there's been a lack of data historically. So the AEC industry has struggled with just having limited access to what I would call comprehensive data around carbon footprints of building materials, but also just sustainability metrics overall. The second problem, which is a really big one, and we're trying to address with our approach at 2050 Materials, is there's this knowledge silo around sustainability. So what I mean by that is the data and the reports that relate to, for example, the carbon footprints of building materials are in a format that is very much just targeting the sustainability specialist. So our industry is sort of used to having, in the best case scenario, a small sustainability team that, for example, an architect can go and consult, but the data has not been structured in a format that it can actually be integrated within our existing workflows to actually make a difference. And then the last blocking point, and this is really changing very fast, is there's been less demand for it, I would say, both on the regulator side and also on the client side. So this is something that's changing quite rapidly, both by industry initiatives that we're seeing pushing for reductions in embodied carbon emissions, but also the simplest thing I can say is any architect or contractor you talk to right now, especially the larger ones, whenever they sit down with a client, sustainability is a core part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned then about kind of data, like how does data hold the key to kind of unlocking this issue?
Yeah, that's it's a question that's really close to my heart, I guess. So I would say data really can change everything if it's used correctly and if it's available in the right format. So in the context of a building project, there's so many stakeholders, first of all, that are involved, and there's so much time that passes from the moment we decide to start working on a project to the moment it actually gets delivered. So what that means in terms of sustainability is that if we truly want to stay within a specific target or budget that we're setting traditionally, or let's say now we're starting to set carbon budgets, we cannot estimate, how well we're doing just at the beginning or just at the end. It's something that needs to be an ongoing process. So similarly to how we set monetary budgets and everyone sort of tracks, the amount they're charging the client and the amount the building materials cost and anything else costs, the same has to happen with carbon and sustainability data. So there are so many technologies, so much information to be able to track what is happening across the project's life cycle. But what's generally missing is the structured data that can integrate into all of these things. And there are some really good examples of cases where this is starting to not be the case. So where data actually does feed into the entire life cycle, and it's super exciting. There's real-time life cycle assessments that are happening from the earliest kind of BIM and digital twin level. There's automated budgeting that's happening around carbon. So whether the cost estimation side or in the BIM models again, there's of course a lot of what we help architects with, which is data-driven material choices. So in the process of both specification, but also in the value engineering exercises, not just discussing aesthetics and price, but actually having objective data-driven discussions happening. And then finally, anything around monitoring and updates of the project that come alongside the data. So generally, I think this happens a lot when we talk about performance, aesthetic, cost with regards to the project. But now there is the opportunity to start including another layer to that discussion, which is the sustainability factors and the carbon budgets.
It sounds really, really interesting. And I guess for people who've been listening to this conversation, how it may seem to them that the step on this journey is quite challenging and complicated and complex. What could they go away and do today or tomorrow or this month to really start that journey, to get them to where we ultimately want to get to truly understand the amount of emissions within the the AECO sector. What's the first thing you'd recommend that they do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say, depending on what level of your journey you're at, a really good starting point is just to follow some blogs, follow some LinkedIn accounts that put out a lot of research and articles on the topic. There's everything from high-level explanations of where we're sitting and what is carbon budgeting, all the way down to how to integrate an API of carbon data set into your BIM model. So I would say the very first thing is really familiarize yourself with the space, and then look at examples of what organizations are doing in order to get on that path. One thing that I feel like the industry is doing a lot, and we are trying to change to some extent, is there's a lot of custom work that's being done to recreate the wheel in some ways, with regards to many things, but also with regards to carbon budgeting. So I would say, have a discussion, read about what other companies are doing, see what fits with your organization, and start getting an understanding of what parts of my own processes can I integrate data in order to start tracking this. And then once you have a basic understanding of what's happening in the space, I would say, companies like what we do, so like 2050 Materials, we have a suite of products which is based on data. So it addresses both someone who is less tech savvy, so for example, an architect during the specification process, and it also addresses the head of digital ecosystems, for example, at large AEC firms that can actually take, the data that we have through an API. So I would say, visit our website, visit our blog, of course, register on the platform to see the kind of information we have. And depending on the level of, maturity of the company, but also the actual person that's looking into this, we most definitely have something that, is specific to your type of work and workflow, and we can help you integrate a lot of that data.
Amazing. All that leaves me now to say is thank you for your time, Phanos. And if people wanted to find out more about 2050 Materials, about yourself, how would they best go away and do that?
Yeah, so 2050 Materials is available in a bunch of different places. So the website is the easiest thing to get to those places. So it's 2050-materials.com. And then from there, you can create a free account on our web application. So it's a web platform that has all kinds of tools around embodied carbon, as well as a huge library of something like 95% of all building products that have carbon numbers associated with them. And then what's really proven to be quite useful for people, especially on the early stages of their journey, is to follow both our blog and or our LinkedIn page, where we create a lot of educational content, I would say, as well. So part of our mission is also not just to, push our products out there, but really to get the industry to start talking and thinking about the topic. So LinkedIn page, blog, and website.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Phanos.
Yeah, thank you, Neil.